All right, welcome back into GEARHAULICS, everybody. Joined again by my two co-hosts, Jared, aka Snackbox from Outside Comfort Zone, and we've got Jason, aka Huck from Huck Outdoors. Welcome in again, fellas. How we feeling?
Feel
Doing
good.
good, doing good.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, as you know, this is the show where hiker fashion doesn't depend on how much bling you have, but rather how much dirt is on your gear. But tonight, we're going to be talking all about this is actually a somewhat different segment. If you're here just strictly for gear, we apologize. But every once in a while, we're going to throw in something that I like to call Beyond the Gear. And tonight, the topic is going to be all about how to plan for your backpacking trips. I think that's probably one of the biggest questions that we all get as content creators is like, how do we do it? How do we put it all together? So I thought that was a great topic to kind of discuss and just rifle through different bullet points on that. The first of which that I have for you guys tonight are the different types of platforms that you can use. Obviously, you've got Google Maps. Everybody's probably heard of that. You've got Gaia GPS. One of my all-time faves is All Trails. I have the pro membership. I know it's a love-hate with All Trails. Some people just hate it and say that it's not accurate. I think it really depends on the type of area that you're living in. But are there any other type of online platforms that you guys use when planning your trips?
Yeah, it depends sometimes on the types of hikes that you're doing, but I'd like to get, sometimes go old school and get a good map, right? A good topo map from National Geographic can do you a lot of good figuring out exactly how hard a trail is and kind of getting that. I have a hard time sometimes with the apps where you have to zoom in because if you have the big map, you kind of get the whole big picture. You can also sometimes I'll show you I like to do sort of long trails, right? So the Colorado Trail, John Muir Trail, I'm hoping to do the Sierra High Route. But often you'll find a whole guidebook here that will give you a lot of great information and do sort of segment by segment elevation profiles. There we go, elevation
There
profiles.
you go.
Those are really good resources for you, and they can often be really well supported. And then lastly, on those trails, you can use an app. It used to be called Far Out, but now it's called, or it used to be Gut Hook, and now it's Far Out. And that's a sort of social media merge where people can post about resources along the trail, whether or not
Yep.
they're good or sort of water flowing, that kind of thing. And so those are good. And then Onyx is one that's sort of newer
Yes.
to the realm, and that's more for hunters typically. But it's great, especially if you're doing some off trail stuff, because it'll tell you if it's public or private land so you don't end up accidentally trespassing.
One of the ones I like to use is CalTopo. I use that a lot for my mapping. And then I like to use YouTube. Really do. I'll watch if I'm going on a hike somewhere, a new
Plug.
location. Like when I went to Wind River Range, I was watching tons of videos on it, so I knew what I was getting into, and knew if it was going to be super hard terrain, if it's going to be a lot of steep trail, or if it's flat, or what there was out there.
Yeah, those are all great. If you want to know anything and everything about the Colorado Trail, we've got our resident pro here in Snackbox. So I got to plug him as well. So Huck mentioned YouTube, and if you want to know anything about the Colorado Trail, just go over to Jared's channel, and you can learn literally everything about all the
Yes.
different sections.
The only caution I have for you about YouTube is, and I'm guilty of this too, is be careful when you're trying to assess how difficult a hike is, because
Mhm.
we're not
Right.
going to film when we are climbing and sweaty and breathing heavy.
I do.
So you can get the, well, you can get the, you can get, I can only think about climbing when I'm climbing. So you can get the sense that a trail is a lot easier than it is, because if we're only filming when things are smooth for us,
Yeah.
partially because we don't want to walk back and get a camera if we set it up, walk past it, climb up, and then go back. We're climbing 3 times. I don't know, my math's bad, but just be careful with that, because I will give you the sense that the Colorado Trail is so flat, and then when you get out there, it is very not
It is
flat.
not.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
no. Yeah, I was talking with this is a shout out to Melissa, the unlikely hiker, too. She shared because she was recently out there too. I don't know if she hit you up there, snack box, about going out there, but she's like, yeah, I want to do this one loop. And I I looked at the elevation on all trails, and it was actually, I think they color code them now, and it was actually like red in like multiple spots. So it's like ridiculous amount of elevation gain within a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's actually kind of a good segue into the next one, which I have just a generic here as conditions, but it's definitely something that you need to think about. It is, and we kind of touched base on this a little bit already, but it's, you have to think about the weather. You have to think about the elevation gains and decreases. You have to think about your own fitness level, and what you can kind of tackle and what you can't. I'm going to have the opportunity to go with these fine fellas here pretty soon to Joshua Tree National Park. It's a new challenge for me because I've never been in more of a desert style of camping where you're not going to have that much, or any like water sources whatsoever. You got to pack it in completely yourself, and you have a lot of extreme, temperature swings and whatnot. So, what do you guys think on the different conditions that you have to think of when you're planning your trips?
There's two sites that I really use a lot when I'm checking weather before the trip, and one is just NOAA.gov. I like to pinpoint where I'm going. I'll go and pinpoint that location. So let's say like Joshua Tree, maybe Queen Valley, wherever I'm going, Rhine Mountain, and it's going to give me a weather forecast for that location. And then one other one is Mountain Forecast, and that gives you a general idea of what the temperatures are going to be at different elevations.
Yeah. I think also it's important to know the sort of typical climate in an area and be honest about it and understand that, what you want the weather to be like has no bearing on what the weather is going to be like. And I saw it just today on the Colorado Trail Facebook group. Somebody said, I'm going to start in June. And I know people say not to start in June, but it's going to be great. And I'm like, no, it's just not reasonable that everybody will say don't start in June, it's too early because of the snowpack. I mean, this photo taken behind me was taken in late July, and this is a pass that just cleared up, right? And it's not high, it's about 11,000 feet. So what you want to do is be really honest about the conditions you're going to see or likely to see, and know that there are a lot of added, it's not just that it'll be cold, right? It could be snowy and dangerous. It could also be the snow melt can mean dangerous river crossings, and that's the number one killer of backpackers is river crossings that they try to take on. So there are a lot of ways in which you want to be very cautious about this and have a lot of time. Last thing that I'll say, is your best friend with this, that if you're not sure about the weather conditions, add days. And so what that will allow are things like if there's a rainstorm this is a great picture here actually for it. This gets up above tree line, but there are afternoon thunderstorms. So you can actually see the thunderstorm leaving here. If you're on a time crunch, you might feel like you have to jump up here and get over this pass when it's dangerous for you to be above tree line. But if you have extra days built in, you can wait right here at tree line, wait for the storm to pass, and then make your way. I can tell you that here, I had to run off the side of the mountain last year and hide from thunderstorms because it rolls in so quickly. So anyway, all that being said, don't let that also scare you. Like, just know the conditions and be prepared for them, and then have a blast with it. But be honest about the conditions, be prepared for it, and give yourself time to deal with them when inclement weather does happen.
Yeah, that's another great point. I actually thought of another one, and I just threw it in here. So sorry, fellas, but it is a very important one. And I'm still relatively new to the backpacking community as well, but this is a big one that even I'm still. And I've asked Huck this before when we went out on our trip. It's kind of just like, how do you find water sources, right? How do you know if water sources are actually there, or if you see it on Google Maps or you see it someplace else, and you're like, oh yeah, there's a river there. I mean, Huck and I both know here in SoCal, it doesn't mean diddly squat because depending on the type of year, it could just be dry as a bone. So what do you guys use to find your water sources when you're out there?
Yeah, when it depends on a lot of different factors. So when I was on the John Muir Trail, for example, there's just water everywhere. So you don't have to worry a lot about it, that you're going to run into water about every couple of miles. And that's good to know for just paring down your pack. Because if you know there's a lot of water, you can take a quart and know that you're fine until the next stop. On the bigger trails, like the more frequently used trails, you can use that GutHook app or Far Out Now, and it will tell you the flow of people will check in later in the season and say the water's good, it's not good, it's out. And then the different guidebooks will also tell you where the water is, and it's essential because there are some stretches on different trails where there's one on the CT you go 32 miles without water. And so if you don't know that until you're 10 miles in, you're in a real pickle from there. So there are a lot of ways to know, but you definitely want to make sure that you have a way to know and that you're planned for it as well.
For here in our local mountains, we actually got pretty lucky. There's a guy named Hiking Jim, and he made a map on Caltopo that lists all the water sources in the San Gorgonio Wilderness. He has one for the San Jacinto Mountains, and he lists it by like 1, 2, 3, 4. One would be just a trickle. 4 is basically like a river, and it has helped a lot in our local mountains trying to find water and planning a trip to like, okay, if we go to like Alger Creek, we know that's a 4 and it's flowing year round. If we go somewhere else, like what's a camp called Jack Straw Springs, that's a 2 or a 3, depending on the year and the snow melt. And then I've been pretty lucky where Canyonlands National Park, I went on a trip, and one of a friend who's hiked it before said they knew where all the water conditions were. And Devin from Backcountry Exposure, he knew exactly where we were getting water the first night and then the second night. In Canyonlands, there's not much water out there.
Yeah, I was just going to say there has to be a lot to be said about experience and just going out there at different times of the year and kind of, being familiar with your surroundings. The other stuff that I use is basically just like Snackbox had mentioned, is just kind of user fed, right? Getting on different forums, seeing what the current conditions are, because I mean, in an ideal world, you kind of would have something like that where it's almost like a Waze for the backpacking space, right? Where it's user-fed data, and they would basically tell you every single time that they go out on a hike or write a comment or something like, yes, it's flowing, or no, it's not. But the reality is it's not that easy all the time.
A lot of national parks, if you message them, say like on one of the social media apps, you can, or call them, you can ask them questions about water sources and they'll let you know pretty easily. They've got rangers out there, and that's pretty updated.
It's also pertinent to this part of the conversation. It's important to know the water purification system you're going to use. Always purify water. Yes. And have a way to purify if that fails. So if you have the Sawyer squeeze, know that the O-ring might fall out. So have an extra O-ring, but also maybe have tablets with you. If you are going with the MSR, the old school pump, know that the ceramic disc can get clogged with some sediment. And then you might need to have, again, tablets or take a little bit of extra fuel in case you need to boil the water. But just know that, have a double up. I've had a number of different times where I've had the lights on the UV run out of batteries. I've had the MSR filter fail. I've lost the O-ring. I've hit the trifecta with water failure. But if you have a backup plan in mind, it'll save the game for you for sure.
Yes, I've been on a couple trips where the Be Free has just clogged and would not have any more flow coming out of it, and that happened on the High Sierra Trail. And luckily, Dave knows Don, and he had his Sawyer.
Yeah.
And he had a gravity feed system with a Sawyer set up, so we were able to get water from him. And then somebody else in the group had another Sawyer as well. So we had a couple different ways to filter. And then I've been on another trail, same thing, Be Free. It had no flow in it. So then my buddy went to grab his Sawyer, and his Sawyer was not in his pack. So luckily there was other people on the trail with another form of filtration, which was like a Sawyer Mini. So we were able to fill up a little bit there. And then when we got to our next camp, we just actually took water from the stream, filtered it out with a handkerchief, and then boiled it.
Wow. Yeah. So many different ways to do it there. Also, what's up, Don? If Don's watching, how you doing, man? Haven't talked to him in a little while. I want to get on over into another point that we have here, which is knowing how to get there. Very important. There's a lot that kind of goes into just making a trip happen. One of which is how are you going to get there? So when I went out and met Jared for the first time in the Smokies, all right, you got to get a plane ticket. You got to figure out how to get from the airport to your campsite for the first night, right? A lot of times it might include multiple different forms of travel. It could be a plane, it could be a bus, it could be an Uber ride, or renting a car and hooking up with hotels for the night or whatever. If you're doing, like I just did the TCT not too long ago, you have to book your boat ride, and a lot of that you have to plan in advance as well. But any other thoughts on different modes of transportation, just kind of getting there in general?
Oh, like you said, you're planning it out like the Catalina Trail or Santa Cruz Island. When you plan your get your permit for where you're camping, you have to also get your boat ride over, getting plane tickets, and then, like you said, Uber or getting picked up by a friend or renting a car. It takes a lot of work to plan that all out.
Yep. This is where, especially with all the moving parts, we were talking about this before we started, but this can be really complicated because there's so many things you have to consider. But what I would also recommend is you're planning this, start looking for, when you're starting this process or getting into backpacking, start looking for loop hikes, meaning hikes that start and end at the same place.
Yes.
And those are your best friend, because then you only have to worry about getting to and from one spot. Whereas if you're doing a longer sort of point to point, that's a real nightmare for
It
figuring
is.
out cars and shuttling, and it's just a nightmare. So a loop hike is your best friend. If you Google best loop hikes in America, you will find loop hikes ranging from 2 miles to 160 miles. There are plenty of them out there, and they're just a game changer.
Yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, when you're trying to plan that out, like a point to point, like say the High Sierra Trail, we rented a van to get up there, and then we're getting picked up on the other side by a friend who was also renting a van.
Yeah.
And then, of course, so we had to be out at a certain time to
Yep.
make it there. So you're having to make those miles. Or if you're
Yeah.
doing a loop hike, you can take your time, and if you have an extra day in there, you're still getting back to your car eventually.
Yeah, there's a couple other points that I wanted to throw in here, and I know Jared has mentioned this on the longer hikes, or your through hikes. If it is point to point, there's other stuff that you have to consider too. It could be longer stretches of either just a road walking, or you have to think of a shuttle type of service. I would never really recommend hitchhiking, but I know that's still something that people do in certain sections, because it's just you might just have really long stretches of just not trail that you just want to skip. And then the other bullet point, I don't know, hopefully I'll remember it, but I just kind of brain farted on it, so I'm just going to move along. The next one that I have here is booking different campsites. So this is another thing that you have to kind of plan in advance. Huck and I just mentioned that with the TCT. There are certain trails that you're going to do, really depending on where you are in the country, but that you basically have to think of in advance. You might have to score a campsite. There's another bullet point right after this too. I might as well throw it up, so it's not necessarily in tandem, but sort of.
Yeah.
Maybe you need a permit, JMT, PCT, any of the big through hikes. You need permits to just get on trail. If you don't have one, you're in serious trouble. So what do you guys think about as far as like thinking about planning ahead for those campsites and scoring those permits?
Yeah, the name of the game is to be looking ahead as early as possible, because if you have, say, your eyes set on doing the Wonderland Trail, which is a 93-mile trail around Mount Rainier, you have to know that the lottery comes up in about 4 or 5 weeks here in March, and then you have to have your permit application in on this one day. Same thing with the John Muir Trail, you have to send in for the lottery. So being early or being flexible about where you hike is really important. So if you're not able to get the exact hike that you want, then that's okay. Especially if you're sort of in Huck's neck of the woods in California, you're not going to find a bad hike. You just might find one that's not as frequently traveled, or not as sort of it doesn't have the one thing you're hiking to. But just know that the name of the game is either being early or being flexible. And you got to be one of those two things, or else you're going to be out of luck for permits.
Yeah, definitely be flexible. I just got permits for Big Pine Lakes. I've been trying for years to get that, and it's a trail you have to get 6 months in advance. So I got some for July just recently. One of the trails I've done in the past, Lost Coast Trail, used to never have permits. Now it does, and on October 1st, all the permits for the following year get issued that day. So you log on October 1st, recreation.gov or something like that, 7 a.m., boom, permits are going.
Yep.
Yeah.
I had that with the campsites in Yosemite, where we booked and they released them all on the 15th for I think 6 months out, 4 months out.
Yeah.
But they were gone by 10:08. They were, every campsite was gone for the month in 8 minutes.
Yeah, Big Pine Lakes, I've been trying for a while, but I finally decided, you know what, let's try 7 a.m. Let's try for this day. Did it for a group of 4, denied. Next day was for the Saturday in 6 months. Like, let's just try for 3. I'm on my computer, I'm on my phone. As soon as it went, hit both, got it on my phone for 3, booked it, I'm good to go.
Nice.
Yeah, it's crazy. Kind of echoing that too. I know that there are even some spots in Yosemite, some trails that they don't even offer a permit online for you to score. Some of them are just walk-ups where it's like you have to be there that day, and I guess you just basically have to plan an alternate route or an alternate hike or an alternate trip that might be somewhere within earshot, because if you're walking up and they don't have it, you're kind of SOL, and that's it. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, you have to be there, and if it's not there, it's like, what do you do? Okay,
Well,
you
that's
gotta have a backup.
One other thing Jared was talking about being flexible. The hike behind me is Ray Lakes.
I
And
love that
what
one.
we did, we went counterclockwise instead of clockwise. We were able to get our permits that way. And it was great. You get the elevation out of the way right away, and then you're hiking back downhill. Other way, it was if you're doing clockwise, you're gaining all the way up to Glen Pass.
Yeah.
But by being flexible, we were able to get permits and went the opposite direction that the majority of the people do. It was nice. Almost every night we had a campsite to ourselves.
Yeah, and that's one of the most incredible ones. Speaking of loop hikes, that was one that I was going to mention. That Ray Lakes loop is about 43 miles, 46 depending on where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great entry point for somebody looking for a great loop hike. There are bear boxes everywhere, so you've got that throughout the entire length of the loop. It's a great one. The other thing I wanted to mention with this is those walk-up permits are worth knowing about. If you're interested in getting those, typically speaking, for any of these hikes, the Park Service does 60 to 70% advanced reservations. Generally speaking, they'll list it on the website too. But then if you go to the park ranger station, if you want a walk-up permit, you can often get them, but you need to be there at 6 a.m. and be waiting for them to open up.
Yes.
And be the person in line. So don't go at 9 a.m., go get coffee and think you're going to be the first person walking through the door, because the first person walking through the door got there 3 hours earlier.
Yep.
But there are other parks like the Everglades, for example. If you want to do the Wilderness Waterway, they don't do any of those. But then you have the service of the Park Service. They'll help you plot out where you're going to be every night and make sure you're not biting off more than you can chew, which is also a pretty important piece of this.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's almost like a tea time at the golf course, man. You gotta be there a couple hours ahead of time just to get a chance to play. All right. Last one that I have for you fellas tonight is going to just be to keep in mind the overall cost of backpacking. It's not always just free or not that much money. I think some people, especially when they're first getting into it, might think, well, it's not going to cost me. Maybe the gear might cost me a little bit when I'm getting into it, but when I finally get out there, what's a campsite going to cost? But we were just talking about this in pre-show too. Huck and I were talking about the TCT, and it's like, if you want firewood, you can't just like go and cut down branches off of a tree. It's got to be prepared. So that's very specific. You have to have these camps. Like we were just talking about, like booking campsites, and campsites are a cost, yes. And then it's kind of like I'm going backwards into all these different topics again. The modes of transportation. How much is a plane ticket going to cost you to get there? How much in gas to, drive there? If you're getting a rental car, it's the cost of the rental car. So it starts to stack up, really depending on how far you go. Or you can just, if it's not a well-established trail, you're going on BLM land or something like that. That's obviously completely free. But there is a wide range here that we can get into. But what do you guys think on the different costs to plan your trip, and then also when it's finally done?
I went ahead and put up my Ray Lakes picture here out of solidarity there with Huck. So it's one of my favorites. One of the things to know about this is that I would encourage anybody thinking about getting into this, or if you're already into it, to never confuse expense with quality of gear. That there's some great examples of gear that's really great, and a lot of the stuff that people will buy early will be they'll trade it out for something a lot less expensive eventually, because they'll learn that the expensive one isn't necessarily what they wanted. So I've seen that with tents, for example. I spent $400 on a nice tent. It was great. But now the tent I use is $150 because it serves me much better, and it's even lighter. And so just know that there are a lot of less expensive options, and don't ever make the mistake of confusing the idea that there's this thing that's expensive, so it's better than the thing that's cheap. That many of the seasoned backpackers you're going to see out there are going to have a lot less expensive gear than the new people, because they know, for instance, that a $15 BRS 3000 Hornet stove will work just as well as the $90 MSR Deluxe, generally speaking. So don't be intimidated by the cost, but also know that it's exciting, because you can go out there and have a $5,000 backpack set up, or you can go out there and have a. I hiked the Colorado Trail with a buddy of mine, and his whole pack maybe was $80 for everything in it. It was incredible. But he did it. He did the trail twice that way. So it can be done.
Wow.
Anyway.
Just one thing with permits and everything, you don't have to pay for permits. There's areas that have free permits. Where we're going in Joshua Tree is free through end of February. Then they're actually going through a permit system finally. Yeah, which I'm surprised they haven't done already. But there's many places, local wildernesses, BLM land, just national forests. You can get out there, find a trail, and most of it's free.
Yeah, a little bit of scouting will go a long way for that. Yep. Yeah. And it's nice because the national parks have some great stuff. This is in Kings Canyon National Park behind me, but you can also find some really beautiful places between here and Yosemite's, like the Little Lakes Valley with Chicken Lake and a couple of others is absolutely stunning. Totally
my favorite
free.
Trail.
It's incredible, right? So you have all these different places where you can go. So again, same kind of thing that the national parks have some great stuff, but by the time you get really seasoned, you'll often find yourself leaving the national parks to get a little more solitude and still some beautiful scenery out elsewhere. Yep.
All right, those are excellent points, fellas. I think that's going to round this one out. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. This might be something that could be like reoccurring. I feel like there's so much more to say on this one. So, you know, there's just a lot more that we can dive into here. But thanks again so much for joining us tonight, or for joining me tonight, fellas. As I always say, first round's on me. I owe these guys a lot of rounds. So after Joshua Tree, we're gonna get them lit here. But that's going to do it for tonight. Check out Huck. He's Huck Outdoors here on YouTube and over on Instagram. And then check out Jared's channel, Outside Comfort Zone, here on YouTube. He's backcountry champion over on Instagram and on TikTok. Anything else you guys want to throw in there, or is that pretty much it?
I just want to say to Huck's point earlier that actually, as I was prepping for the Joshua Tree trip, I found all the best videos were Huck's videos going there to give me a sense of what I was in for. And so there are some great videos out there. And it's nice when you're planning these. The planning is at least as fun as the trip. Yes. So really dive in and have a good time with it, because it's a blast.
When we were planning the High Sierra Trail, we actually met up a couple times before and just over beers and burgers and just sat down, and everybody talked about where they wanted to go, where they wanted to camp, what they wanted to see, and just made sure everybody got to do what they wanted to do on the trail.
That's awesome.
A lot of fun to plan it.
Yep.
Great stuff. All right, guys. I can't wait to meet up with these guys in a little bit. I'm not sure when this recording is going to be coming out, but super stoked for our trip. For Fireball Snack Box and Huck, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. We'll see you later.